The most extraordinary legal moment in American history unfolded on May 30th, 2024, when the world watched an unprecedented courtroom drama reach its dramatic climax and change the landscape of 21st century politics forever. In a Manhattan state courthouse packed with media, legal titans, political operatives, and the keen eyes of a global audience, a jury of 12 ordinary citizens delivered a verdict that will be remembered for generations. The defendant was Donald J. Trump, the former president of the United States, a man who had loomed large over the political stage for more than a decade, and the charges centered on a hush-money conspiracy that prosecutors said distorted the very integrity of American elections. The charges against Trump were rooted in an explosive allegation that during the 2016 presidential campaign, Trump and those around him concealed a payment to adult film actress Stephanie Clifford, known professionally as Stormy Daniels, to silence her about a personal encounter that could have damaged his electoral prospects. Prosecutors described a deliberate scheme of falsifying business records on 34 felony counts to disguise payments of up to $420,000 made through intermediaries to cover up the truth. For weeks inside the ornate courtroom of Manhattan Supreme Court, witnesses testified, evidence was examined, and legal teams sparred with ferocity. Prosecutors painted a meticulous picture of deception, citing bank records, internal documents, and testimony from Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, who said he was directed personally to make reimbursements that were then falsely logged as legal fees. Trump's defense team countered by questioning credibility, challenging motives, and accusing the prosecution of political bias, a theme Trump himself would trumpet again and again outside the courtroom walls. After more than 5 weeks of trial proceedings, the fate of one of the most polarizing figures in modern American history was placed in the hands of 12 jurors. These jurors were ordinary New Yorkers drawn at random, tasked with a solemn civic duty to weigh evidence and arrive at a judgment on whether Donald Trump had indeed broken the law. For the first time, a former president of the United States was on trial in a criminal case. The stakes were enormous, not just for Trump and his political future, but for the integrity of the American justice system itself. On the second day of deliberations, the jury stunned the nation and the world. After careful examination of the evidence, they returned a unanimous guilty verdict on all 34 felony counts. The courtroom and newsrooms across the globe erupted. This verdict confirmed that in the eyes of the law, Trump had been responsible for falsifying business records in a calculated effort to hide payments designed to influence the outcome of an election. The decision marked the first time in U.S. history that a former president had been convicted of criminal conduct. Security cameras inside the courtroom captured the jurors solemnly answering the clerk when each was polled to confirm their verdict. The gavel came down. The judge presiding, Justice Juan Merchan, acknowledged the weight of the moment. Outside, news helicopters circled above Manhattan as the details of the verdict flashed across screens from New York to Tokyo, London, and beyond. The world was witnessing uncharted legal territory. Immediately after the verdict, Trump's reaction was defiant. He stepped to the microphones outside the courthouse and lashed out at the process, calling it a disgrace and a rigged trial. He pledged to appeal every twist of the legal battle with the ferocity of his unprecedented political machine. His supporters rallied behind him, echoing accusations that the prosecutorial team was driven not by justice but by politics. The impact of the verdict reverberated through the political world. Trump's campaign team reported an unprecedented fundraising surge, more than $52.8 million raised in 24 hours after the verdict, dwarfing typical fundraising figures and underscoring the highly charged nature of his political influence. Supporters embraced Trump as a martyr of a legal system they believed had been weaponized against him. Yet, for all the political theatrics that surrounded the verdict, the legal mechanics of what came next became a subject of intense debate. In New York state law, a person is technically not considered a convicted felon until they have been formally sentenced. That meant Trump's destiny, and whether he would ever face jail time, fines, probation, or some rare judicial outcome was still unresolved. Judge Merchan set a sentencing date that sparked its own legal furor. Initially scheduled for July 11, 2024, just days before the Republican National Convention, where Trump was expected to be formally nominated once again for the presidency, the sentencing became a flashpoint of constitutional drama. Trump's legal team appealed to the highest court in the land, the U.S. Supreme Court, seeking to delay or block the sentencing, arguing that it would unfairly interfere with his campaign and potentially his transition back into office. The Supreme Court, however, refused to intervene, denying the request in a split 5-4 decision and clearing the way for the sentencing to proceed as scheduled. This decision underscored the immense complexity of balancing judicial proceedings with political realities, especially when a defendant is simultaneously a presidential candidate and president-elect. But history took another fascinating turn. On January 10, 2025, when Trump finally appeared in court, some reports say via video feed from his Florida estate, Judge Merchan delivered a sentence that stunned legal experts and political analysts alike. Trump was given an unconditional discharge. In essence, the judge allowed the guilty verdict to stand while imposing no jail time, fines, or probation. The sentence sidestepped dramatic punishment but formally cemented Trump's status as a convicted criminal in the eyes of the law. The judge's rationale, as he explained it in brief remarks, was rooted in the extraordinary circumstances. Trump was on the brink of assuming the presidency again, and imposing conventional sentencing could raise unprecedented constitutional questions and complications. The unconditional discharge acknowledged the jury's decision, the first criminal conviction of any former commander-in-chief, but also reflected the judiciary's deference to the political and legal realities of the moment. Trump's response to the sentence was triumphalist. He called the prosecution a political witch hunt, claimed vindication in his appeal for justice, and insisted that the ordeal only strengthened his political standing. His supporters declared victory, pointing out that Trump walked away without prison time, a fine, or probation, and that he had now become a historic felon who would still lead the Republican ticket. Yet, critics warned that this legal saga was far from over. Appeals were expected, constitutional challenges loomed, and the repercussions of a convicted former president serving, or even winning, the highest office in the land were fodder for constitutional scholars and political operatives alike. The debate was no longer just legal. It had become existential, touching on the balance of power, the nature of the rule of law, and the meaning of justice in a deeply divided nation. As the dust settled from one of the most explosive courtroom dramas of modern times, one thing was clear: nothing about this story would fade quietly. The world had watched a man who once roamed the halls of power in the White House stand in a Manhattan courtroom as a criminal defendant, hear 12 jurors independently and unanimously convict him, and then emerge with a sentence that defied traditional expectations, all while remaining a towering force in global politics. Whatever happens next, appeals, new legal battles, or the political theater of the election cycle, this landmark case will be studied for decades. It has reshaped the narrative of accountability, redefined the limits of justice, and reminded the world that in America, even the most powerful are subject to the scrutiny of the law, but also that the outcomes of justice can be as unpredictable as the man at the center of the storm.